Hi there, and welcome to another edition of Cool People. Now, over the last 2 years or so, since I came out very publicly as being trans and started my transition and then doing trans awareness training and public speaking and media appearances, I've met all sorts of cool people. And the whole purpose of this series is to share my friends with you. And one person who I came across actually a couple of years ago who just started transitioning just shortly after me was a lovely lady called Zari. And she actually started transitioning at the age of 73. Now, I mean, I started at the age of 48. So, and I've been interviewing people from all ages. And I interviewed someone who was 21 the other day. But I thought it was just such a great opportunity just to have a chat to somebody who started transitioning later in life. So Zoe, welcome to Cool People.
Hi, Katie.
Yeah. So, and thanks ever so much for agreeing. Yeah, lovely to see you. I mean, it's funny, we've been chatting, on and off for over the last 2 years, and it's great to actually have the chance to have a chat now, isn't it? It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, would you like to tell us a little bit about your story?
Yes, I mean, in a sense, I should start at the end and then go back to the beginning. I think that because it's very unusual that I came out so late, and I was over in Ireland at the time. I was in a sort of convention, and we were in a meeting discussing, and someone there talked about their trans partner. And it's very hard to explain why, but suddenly I had to know about this. And after the meeting was over, I went down and chatted to her for about an hour. And I don't know why, but at that moment, some of the scales just started to fall away from my eyes. And then I talked to another friend who happened to have been trained in psychology, and we talked for hours and stuff. And I began the early stages of admitting to myself that I was different. I was trans in some way. I wasn't at that point still wasn't feeling sure. I thought, well, I'm definitely transvestite. I'd even denied that, even though I'd cross-dressed often really all my adult life. But I'd always told myself, well, I'm just theatrical. I like it.
You can get away with working that way.
Well, it's a very, very powerful thing. When you have denial going on big time, you can find all ways of deceiving yourself. And it is yourself you're being dishonest with, nobody
completely.
else. That's the powerful thing.
Yeah.
And so it's therefore the question arises, well, why? Why would someone who eventually became vividly clear that they were a trans woman suddenly realize that, no, I have to accept who I am and recognize who I am, when I found all kinds of ways all my life of telling myself that I was otherwise. Now, I was brought up as a child. I come from an area known as the Wirral, which is near Liverpool, Chester. And it was a very conventional background. My father, I think it's fair to say, was extremely socially conservative. And mind you, a lot of people were in those days. We're talking about 40s, 50s here. A very different world. The past is a different country. So as a child, I had no frame of reference which would even give me an idea that there could be such a thing as being transgender. And I never consciously thought, oh, I'm a girl in a boy's body. At that stage, I never thought that at all. And then I think perhaps because my father wanted to masculinize me, I don't know, I was sent off to public school, to boarding school at the age of 11. And that really was a crash course. There you are, just with boys, no girls anymore. And you just had to sink or swim. And my method of swimming was eventually through acting and through public speaking, even at that young age. And at the age of 11, I'd had a terrible, terrible first term at school. And I just sort of hid away, which is so difficult for someone who's naturally extrovert. But I did. And then they had little sort of school sketches and plays and things at the end of the term. And I played this tiny, tiny role. But somehow doing that, suddenly all my friends, acquaintances, and everybody else looked at me differently. And I realized that my key to the world, to survive, to get rid of bullying, was through acting and performance.
Wow.
And that, therefore, informed a great deal of the rest of my life, how to survive. I also knew that I was attracted to girls, not boys. Again, that very much took me away from the sense, shall we say, of understanding perhaps about being a different gender as opposed to a different sexual orientation.
Mm.
And so once I left school early at the age of 16, and I went into accountancy. In those days, you could do that. You go for 5 years training and start at 16. So there I was working in a deeply conservative world of
Yeah.
accountancy, training to be a chartered accountant. And everything was utterly about conformity at school and then in accountancy. But I was very interested in girls, and I ended up getting married fairly young at the age of 23 and had children. But soon after I got married, we sort of moved into the 70s, and the kind of David Bowie and Mark Bolan and all these people, the wonderful glam rock. And I was really, really interested in them and their makeup.
Yeah.
And I wanted their makeup, and I would privately start to do that.
Yeah.
And given the field in my work, of course, I couldn't and didn't have the courage to express that in any way outwardly. But obviously my then wife knew what was going on, and she didn't like it, not at all. So there's a great deal of shame, a very great deal of shame that I felt. And again, there weren't really any examples out there of people who were trans women.
No.
There was a woman called Jan Morris, who was a Guardian journalist and had been a war correspondent, who came out. Obviously, I paid a great deal of attention to what was going on with her, but still the penny didn't drop. And then I went through my life periodically cross-dressing every opportunity I could get. And it's hard to explain the sort of inner feelings of excitement that were around anything to do with women's stuff. One of the things that used to upset my first wife a great deal was I'd go shopping with her. I loved it when she went shopping for clothes. And I was extremely over-interested, shall we say, in what she was wearing and the makeup that she wore, which was very unkind and I think quite cruel and controlling of me. But really now, of course, it's obvious it wasn't what it seemed.
No.
It just wasn't. And of course, we're talking now about things spreading over a long time. And I can't do other than fast forward maybe to about 25 years ago, when I was living and working in America, and I decided that I had to leave. I was burned out from my career, and I've been working sort of internationally as a financial person, financial director, and I was worn out, and I wanted to change. And I went to a so-called leadership development program in Texas, and we did all this stuff, which is normally aimed at just trying to steer you in the right area of career. But it became evident that I wasn't in the right field at all, that I should be in theatre or in PR or journalism. So I decided I was going to make the complete change. And in doing that, I started to, as I was preparing to leave the States, we went to a brief visit to San Francisco, went to the Haight-Ashbury area, got my ears pierced, and I grew my hair long. And I came back to the UK, and I remember my father picked us up from the airport, and he looked at me almost as if he was physically repulsed by my appearance. He couldn't handle it, not even what was relatively minor. I mean, just ear piercing, you know. And so there was a signal, a strong signal, which I knew anyhow would have been there. I'd rather expected it, but it was the climate in which I lived.
Yeah.
And I was brought up. And I tried when I went to work for the BBC, as I ended up doing. You know, I wore different clothes, and I'd say my hair grew very long. But I knew that, again, something wasn't right, because the BBC for me was still too conservative. I still couldn't fully express myself. Yeah. I remember, I took a holiday in Lanzarote once, and I had my hair bleached and short and everything, but very different. And I thought that was thrilling, but I didn't know why it was thrilling, I guess. And then I embarked upon getting myself tattooed. And boy, did I get tattooed. I have nothing on my neck. You can probably see around here.
Yeah.
and my arm.
Yeah.
My whole body is now completely covered. And I thought, well, I don't have body dysphoria. But of course, it's clear to me now that I did have gender dysphoria. I wanted to find any way I could to change my body. I was thrashing around trying to find something I could do. And I didn't know what it was. And then on that date, I was in Ireland, 2 years ago. I'd gone there. It was the time of the blast, the beast from the east, that's it. The snow was there. We were locked in, and it was very atmospheric when the first major realizations started to overwhelm me. And I like to describe it, the metaphor, as if I built a huge dam of denial about myself. And that dam was very strong, very, very big, holding back an awful lot of water. But it was then that the first crack in that dam began to emerge. And I think, as happens in any situation like that, it doesn't take long before the whole thing collapses. And for me, that was in the March. By the June, I knew. I had this sense, and I had talked to my then wife and my second wife about it, because I wanted to be sure. Now, I thought, well, she knows I do some cross-dressing. It's no good just saying I'm transvestite. That doesn't feel like I'm necessarily being honest. So I explored and talked to people, even talked to a gender therapist. And suddenly I woke up one morning and I knew. I just absolutely knew. There wasn't any doubt any longer in my mind as to who I was. And then I had, of course, the problem, well, what do I do about it? I'm old. I can't waste time. I went over to Lithuania to an event there, and there was one evening, there were about 400 people there, when I came down to the party in the evening fully cross-dressed. And therefore, it was really the biggest sort of coming out event. I'd done things, I'd been to parties, I'd done things before that where I'd come out. But this was a big thing. Again, my wife wasn't there. But I came back and I hadn't got the nail varnish off. And she spotted this. And she collared me. And she said, look, I am sick to death of your tattoos and your cross-dressing. I think we'd better divorce. And I thought, I'm going to have to tell her now. I've been trying to find a way to tell her. And so I did. And there was a kind of silence. And she said, oh, right. Well, maybe we could sort of buy another house, and you could live in one part of the house and I'll live in the other part, and we'll meet in the kitchen. I don't know. She immediately contrived this idea that it's strange the way she did it. But she didn't say, no, I'm leaving you, which is what I felt certain she would do. I felt absolutely sure my whole life at that point was going to come crashing down around me. Didn't seem any possibility of any other outcome. But in fact, that's not what happened. And then she said, well, look, I'd rather you didn't cross-dress in this house. Wait until we move. 2 days later, she said, oh, all right, let's have a look at you. So I did. I'd already bought some nice dress and so on. And I came down and she looked at me. She said, gosh, you look good. I thought you'd look like someone trying to be a prostitute. And well, having revealed to her, and the world having not crashed around me, then I had to talk to my children. I've got 4 children, and now I've got 8 grandchildren. At the time I had 6 grandchildren. I had to tell my children, and I phoned them up because they don't live near me. I was then living in Bristol. I now live just a bit outside of Bristol. And that was tough. But again, the world didn't crash down around me. And then I thought, well, I've got to tell my sister, who's very, very conservative. And again, she kind of coped with it, a bit utterly disbelieving. I mean, she really was incredulous. And then her reaction was, was it in any way my fault? I said, no, nothing to do with you. Nothing to do with you at all.
No.
I was just being me. I've always just been me. And so then Suzanne said, well, you can go and tell the people in the road. So to her surprise, I said, okay, I am. This was all within hours, almost 48 hours of initially talking to her.
Wow.
And I went round the road and I talked to my friends there and told them. And they were great.
Yeah.
You know, I was living in a very, very liberal bohemian type area of Bristol, lovely. And they were extremely supportive. And my wife was very, very surprised. I think she'd expected shame and opprobrium to surround us both by virtue of my coming out.
Yeah.
And so there I was. I, within 2 days, moved to fully living as a woman. She took all my old clothes off to the charity shop, and she actively engaged in buying a completely new wardrobe for me. Spent a lot of money. I mean, it was tend to be lower cost stuff, you know, TK Maxx and the likes, but nevertheless, it was a whole wardrobe. And my feeling, and I talked about it with her, was that I have no time. I've left this. How could I leave this until my 70s before I knew who I was? I mean, I just could not believe I'd done it. And therefore the reaction was, right, in that case, I'm going to have to move fast. The moment health is really good, I can do things. And so having, in that period, maybe from the March to when I fully came out in the August, I'd looked at endless YouTube videos of other trans women. Yeah. And I'd read articles. I had done a crash course in transitioning.
Yeah.
And I embarked on planning a whole route of transition, getting electrolysis, getting facial feminization surgery, obviously hormone treatment, and that wasn't so easy, but I went to Gender GP online, and I was able to, within by October following that, I was able to get myself onto the hormones.
Yeah.
And I started electrolysis in September, a process which, by the way, is still continuing. It's a slow and painful process. And then in the following April, I had the first stage of facial feminization surgery, which involved my nose.
Yeah.
You know, I can see my nose.
Oh, yeah.
And lifting the eyebrow and a couple of tucks on the eyelids and lifting the upper lip slightly. Yeah. And so that was done. And then I planned the second stage, which was to get the so-called tracheal shave, which is to get the Adam's apple shaved, and then to get a sort of mini, my age, darling, a mini neck lift and facelift, just to sort things out around here. I mean, I don't think I would have done that if I had come out young. I would have just allowed myself to age, but this is it.
Yeah,
this is my only chance.
Absolutely. I have to say, you look absolutely amazing, Zoe. You really do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Incredible.
Because the other thing is the voice. And I did start going to a voice coach. And I did that for a few months. And, having had a lot of acting training, I haven't mentioned that when I quit journalism, I retired from that. I also then got myself some professional acting training. And I'd always done acting, as you may have gathered from my earlier comments. And I thought, well, I could do this. I could do voices. I'm used to acting. But then I stumbled. I found this really, really difficult.
Oh, isn't it? Yeah.
Because I didn't want to sound like Minnie Mouse. I didn't want to be talking in falsetto. And also, my life, going back to when I was a child, my voice had been my passport. It had helped me with public speaking. It helped me with acting. I had quite a period in politics, in public speaking. And of course, it's just in terms of how people respond to me, having a kind of actorly voice, as you might say. And it, of course, it was a huge asset to me. I eventually ended up in Radio 4, although my voice is a bit old-fashioned for them these days. But nevertheless, my voice was a great asset, you can imagine, in radio broadcasting, which I pursued for quite a few years. And so it is such an important part of me. It's the one thing about me of which I felt most confident. And then trying to change it and trying to say, well, I want a feminine voice, but I want a resonant voice. I want a strong woman's voice, and how to get there. And in the end, she said to me, look, you can do this, but I think you need to take a break. You've got a barrier. There are barriers. And I think another one of them is with my children, because it's not been easy in the end. They've not found it at all easy. And I think they're seeing all these changes. And then for me to change my voice is a step. Still, I will work on it.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite ready. I'm not there yet.
It's funny with the voice. I still have a bit of an issue with my voice, although I'm getting more comfortable with it now. I've had some voice coaching. I had 6 sessions, and I didn't work on it as much as I should have done. But I like you know, I do a lot of public speaking, and you know, when you're doing that, you have to be thinking about what you're saying rather than how you're saying it, and just because there's one thing when you're doing your voice coaching, you know, you read out passages and things, and yeah, you can really do it then. You can do that voice then, but it's completely different doing that to when you're just having a natural conversation.
Yes.
And because your brain is thinking about what you're going to say. And of course, when you're actually doing public speaking, the pressure is on even more, because as well as thinking about what you're saying, you've got to be on it. You're presenting, so it's a lot harder. But also, I think it's been a bit of a cop out for me, because I suppose like you really, so it's very publicly out. I mean, I couldn't be more out if I tried, you know, short of putting billboard adverts on. I couldn't be more, yeah. You know, everybody knows I'm trans, and so, like, you know, if I if I go to a business networking thing, for instance, you know, the usual question is, oh, so what do you do? Well, you know, I sort of say, oh, well, I'm 2 things. I'm a photographer and filmmaker, but I'm also a trans ambassador because I'm trans, and you know, blah blah blah. And so it just gets it out there straight away. And because then I think, well, actually, I don't really need to try, and I think, well, actually, the whole journey is about authenticity, and I'm not trying to put on an act. This is my voice, my authentic voice, and it's funny, I've got much more comfortable with it, so I don't have that as much of a hang up about it as I used to. And it's funny that my voice has lightened from what it used to be. When I look back at some of my videos from 2 years ago, you know, I was talking much more from my chest, so I'm talking much more from my head now. But I know that I've got further to go, because I mean, when I go out and about, I tend not to be misgendered, because people get the visual impact first, you know. So I don't tend not to get misgendered then, but on the phone I get misgendered every day.
It's horrible.
Yeah, but
I absolutely hate it. I find when I'm misgendered, I go into a downward spiral. And it feels invalidating.
It does.
It feels terribly invalidating. And it's one of the hardest things. I mean, living out there, and I'm learning again. It's still only fully out there for 1.5 years or so, a bit more than that. And I feel very much more confident now than I did. And I know very well that people tend to take you as they find you. And people will also see everybody differently. Some will see me as much more obviously trans than other people will do. It's just how they are and their world perception, and I have no control over that. But I find that if somebody is in any way starts doing this business of calling me sir, then I tend to start to fall apart. And I'm still doing that. I think I'm less bad now, and I do correct them. I do think that in my mind also is all those young trans women who wouldn't have the confidence to do that. Well, I kind of am there because I do, because I'm used to that, and I've been around a long time. And I will tell people, that's hurtful. And they'll say, oh, I didn't mean it. And I'll say, no, but you weren't thinking. You weren't thinking about it. And thoughtlessness is hurtful. And it's very difficult, because I mean, I don't know how tall you are. We've never met.
I'm 5'7".
Well, you see, I'm 6'2", and that's obviously an enormous indicator that I'm not not obviously even from a distance, unless you see me without.
There are cisgender women that are 6'2", so
not many.
No, not so many.
Not many, believe me. So in terms of living out there, I now carried on doing all sorts of things that I used to do. I'm in my arts club, on the committee with that, organising things with conventions that I'm involved with, and to some extent with politics, with my very pro-European views. And I've been out campaigning on that. But the one thing I've not done, I've not returned to, found a way of returning to, is acting. And as you were just saying, you know, acting, well, good acting, of course, is where you fully inhabit the character. You have to have authenticity for people in the audience to believe in your character, but you are still acting.
Mm.
and I'm not acting being Zoe. And I think you really hit the nail on the head
Yeah.
when you talked about authenticity. Now, this
Mm.
is me.
Yeah.
Yes, you see me as you hear me. This is me.
Yeah.
And whatever you make of me,
Yeah.
whatever people think about someone being transgender, tough, it's just who I am.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
when you hear the so-called radical feminists
Mm.
talking about the likes of ourselves going on their territory and threatening women's spaces, they don't grasp that this isn't a debate. There
No.
isn't a debate around this. I am me. You
Yeah.
see me, and this is who I am.
Yeah.
And the really great thing for me is that through all those years, the one thing that was most difficult to accommodate was that feeling of being two people. I didn't know in this sense why I was two people, but I always felt, well, there's two people in me.
Mm.
I'm just like that. Some people must be like that. I'm like that. And I've always had to hold back on one of those people, but find ways through theatre and performance, maybe to allow that person to come out and be
Mm.
seen. But as soon as I came out, I wasn't two people anymore.
Mm.
And it's a very, very subtle thing, because this is what I feel. Yes, I can talk intellectually till the cows come home, but this is who I am, what I am. It is not who I think I am.
No,
It
absolutely.
is not who or I organize or try to portray. It
No.
is who I am.
You're living your truth, aren't you? And
Yeah.
it feels amazing, doesn't it? It feels
Yeah.
incredible.
After I came out, I felt a sense of euphoria for about 3 months.
I was just going to say the same.
Euphoria.
I was going to say the same word, because a lot of people talk about gender dysphoria, and not many people talk about gender euphoria. And so
Yeah.
I'm so glad you used that word. It does. It does feel euphoric. It feels amazing, even though well, you alluded to it just now when you were saying about the problems you've had with your children, and I had a lot of problems with my family as well, and it's been a very, very bumpy road. But even put all that behind me, in myself, I feel absolutely amazing, and that is
Exactly so.
overriding things. So it's being able to live your truth is absolutely incredible.
It is. I mean, I must say that with my children, it's not been that they have been socially conservative. It's not that they feel I've done anything wrong. I think that if you're a trans woman and you've got adult children, or even maybe somewhat younger children, what's very, very difficult for them is coping with the idea of their father, suddenly being different, not being what they thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about approval or disapproval. It is just foundation shaking for them. Hard for me to understand because I've never been through it.
Mm.
But that's how it is. It is deeply affecting. Whereas my friends, it doesn't affect their lives.
No.
It doesn't affect their lives at all.
No.
So it's a big, big deal. And after the euphoria, I found that I didn't have any internal problems, again, just as you described about yourself. But the external issues around family and the complications of all that have weighed very, very heavily on my mind. The joy and euphoria that I initially had started to be, in a way, eroded, not because of anything I felt internally, but because of the external difficulties and the fact I could see my children were struggling. And, I love and adore my children. They mean the world to me. And to see them having difficulties meant that it was hard for me.
Mm.
And trying to deal with all of that, and to some extent still having to, it's not easy. This is not an easy thing to do. When the likes of Germaine Greer tell you that, oh, well, you've not been through menstruation, you've not been through all the problems with pregnancy and all the things that women have to go through with with going into older life and so on, you haven't lived it. No, it's true. I haven't. But this is not an easier journey. It's a different one. It's a different set of experiences, a different whole lot of challenges. And anyhow, I had to live much of my life as a lie.
Yeah.
That's not fun.
It's not.
I look back now, and obviously I couldn't possibly want to change anything that would have, my children, as I say, I had children, it matters. I wouldn't reinvent the past. But if you took that out of the picture, I feel I've cheated my life. I've cheated myself of a whole life When I look at the young trans women, those who come out in their teens, and see them in their 20s and 30s who 100% pass as women.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah.
Because they can, because
Yeah.
they've had the hormone treatment early enough. And obviously some of them will have surgery too. And so although they will take with them a lot of difficulties, and so many trans women, indeed trans men and boys, have mental health problems, which I'm blessed not to have.
Yeah.
So I'm well aware it's not easy for any of the trans community.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I do have this great sense of loss.
Yeah.
And so
I do.
I would say to anybody who thinks that somehow, I'm a threat, that I'm going to occupy women's spaces, that I'm going to use this appearance of mine as a means to get at women, it's bonkers.
Oh, totally.
Utter a figment of their imagination.
Yeah.
And of course you'll find the odd example, but then every section of society will have criminals amongst them. And so it's with some bewilderment that I hear what they have to say.
Yeah. I mean, every now and again, I mean, I remember you heard a Radio 5 Live interview that I did when I was pitted against a TERF, and for anybody watching, the term TERF, it stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. So a bunch of people who are basically anti-trans. So and yeah, I mean, to begin with, because it was quite early on actually in my transition and putting myself out there as a trans ambassador, and I was actually quite unprepared for her ferocity to begin with, and I floundered a bit to begin with, but then eventually I sort of picked it up a bit, and then I gave her what and just showed for the uncaring person that she was, and I think she showed herself up in the end, yeah, and it was just, but it's just horrendous, some of the stuff that she was saying, and and I've had run-ins with them, since, and you think, well, what is their problem with us? We are not a threat to anybody. We just want to live our lives in peace. We just want to be happy, just like everyone else, don't we? That's all.
I think so. I feel just to feel joined up and to be expressing ourselves fully, and it's what I think everybody wants to do if they have the chance.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets that chance, because although we now live in a much more socially liberal society than was the case when I was young, far more liberal, and where homosexuality was illegal until the late 60s, and certainly for the gay community, even the 70s, 80s, and perhaps into the 90s was still not easy.
No, it wasn't.
A legal problem, but society was still very judgmental. And the big change seems to me to be in the last 20 years.
I think so.
And I think for us in the trans community,
we're way behind them, aren't we?
we're way behind, because although there's now a great deal of conversation around it, as there was in the 1970s for the gay community, the actual behavior of people, the lack of being informed, the lack of it being just day to day, in terms of people's experiences of seeing people like us, is lagging way, way behind. And when I hear people say, well, the likes of me shouldn't be around women in certain places, it's rather like listening to people back in the 70s, and I do well remember this, when people said that gay men should not be teaching children, particularly in primary schools, because they would be likely to abuse them.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the same conversation. And yet the people in this country who are pushing it are not sort of right-wing neoconservatives. They're not like in America, where you've got the religious far right. These are people who in other respects would see them as fighting the liberal causes, fighting for women's rights, and quite rightly too. Yeah. But for some reason, seem to think that all they're fighting for is threatened by us.
Yeah, and that things that they sort of build these, or have these organisations, and they give them a name that's sort of like a respectable name, like a women's place, and things like that, and the LGB Alliance, just deliberately taking the T off the and just to try and make them look respectable, but the very dangerous people, and the views are they're just vile, aren't they? They just really are.
Well, my experience of people who hold extreme views, who are zealots, they have a very fixed belief, is that is closely aligned to bigotry. And I, again, really want to stress that my experience in transition, nevertheless, has been overwhelmingly positive with women. I found it far, far easier to come out and be, and I want to be with women. I want to have female friends, not for any kind of sexual thing, just to be friends.
Absolutely.
I want the pleasure, the privilege of having my best friends be women, just because they're be friends.
Absolutely.
It's the world that I've always wanted to be in. You know, as a kid, I wanted to play with the girls. Yes, I was attracted to women, but it's not just that. It's a lot more than that. And I've had so much support, whereas quite a few men who've been slightly discomforted or bewildered, not unpleasant, but not known how to behave quite around me.
I think a lot of them feel threatened in some way. And I think a lot of them, I don't know whether it's because maybe they're worried what it might say about them if they find themselves attracted to you, or I don't know. It's just, I found the same thing, that I find it's a lot easier to talk to women about the men. And certainly when I first started coming out, because coming out is a gradual process. I mean, I know I did it in a big way with my coming out video, and bang, it went out there. But before that, I did come out to a very small group of very trusted friends to begin with, and they were all women. You know, it was just it was women and a few gay men, but you know, it was just a very, very small group. But certainly I always found it was a lot easier talking to women, and generally I've found that the vast majority of people are absolutely okay with it. And there's only but I just think it's this minority, you know, of these TERFs. They're a minority, they're a small group, but they're very noisy. That's the trouble.
Well, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time talking about them, because they are a French group. But many of them work as academics in our major universities. Many of them have very close contact with top female journalists at The Guardian, The Times, The Economist.
Yeah.
Now, publications who you would normally respect and regard as being very socially liberal, certainly The Guardian and The Economist.
Yeah.
And they have written some terrible stuff in their columns, had people write terrible stuff about us. And I find that very distressing, as someone who's been a Guardian reader since the age of 19, and was even managed the Guardian when I started. You know, I'm devoted to the newspaper, and to find in its columns all this dreadful stuff, and then to see more recently that a number of trans members of their staff have resigned from the Guardian. You don't resign lightly from a job in the Guardian, not if you're a journalist. That it's got that bad. So it's a very complex problem, but in my normal day-to-day life, it doesn't have any effect, really.
No, me neither. No. It's only obviously because I stick my head above the parapet, and obviously the further you do that, the more you're likely to get a shot at. And so, you know, I sort of expect it, and I'm sort of, I suppose, developed a bit of a hard shell for that, because I'm expecting it and think, well, okay, well, you know, when that sort of thing does happen and they rear their ugly heads, then okay, it just illustrates. It helps. In fact, in some ways, it helps when they do appear. It helps to illustrate the point that these people are around, and you know, their views are just bizarre and damaging. So that's how I sort of deal with it. But in my day-to-day life, I've been very well accepted. And it's funny, when I first, because I've been living as female since 2nd of September 2018, so it's about a year and a half now. When I first started going out on jobs, you know, my photography work, as Katie, and wearing a dress on a job, I was so worried, you know, how I would be received, you know, what would people say? And it hasn't been any problem at all. It's just
So
it hasn't been any problem at all. There's not one issue at all. And I suppose, and I think that in itself has just given me the confidence. And I think by being so visible, just as you are, and I know you do a lot of stuff on YouTube, and which is brilliant, and it just gives hope to other trans people when they're at that stage of just accepting that they're trans, because that is the hardest thing, just accepting it, because you've got all that self-denial. First of all, it's your fear of admitting to yourself. So I didn't want to admit to myself I was trans. I really didn't. Nobody wants to be trans, but it's just that fear of it. But having role models that you can see, well, actually, it really is okay to be trans. It's fine. You can be happy and have a good life as a trans person. I think it's vital to have that. It really is.
Well, in a way, obviously, having come out older, in some respects, is easier, because, of course, I don't have the career thing. to worry about. How might have people responded to me, given you have built yourself a certain place in the organization? If I'd been at the Beeb or been working in corporate America, I don't know, and I've never had to think about that.
Because I had the added problem with my photography business was named after my old male name, which was Martin, because Martin Neves Photography and Film. So, and it had been an established brand for 22 years. So it was, what do I do? When I changed my name to Katie, what do I do? And I decided to keep the name of that business the same. And that's why I decided to come out as publicly as I did, because I thought that's the only way to bring people along on the journey. And it's funny, now I'm actually better known as Katie than I was as Martin. So I could actually change the name of that business to Katie Neves Photography and Film. But I'm not going to, because it's part of my story. And it's quite nice because I'm very comfortable talking about my old name and my old identity. And whereas a lot of people call their old name their dead name. Whereas
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I hate it. You won't get me even mentioning it. I feel very, very differently from you.
Yeah, and most trans people do. Trans people feel as you do. But I feel very comfortable about it, and I look back fondly on my old name and what I achieved as Martin, and so I'm grateful to Martin for stepping back and allowing me to be Katie. So I'm quite happy just to keep the name going in as my business, as my photography business, not my trans awareness training business, but as a photography business. And that's fine. That's a business name, but it's not my name.
Well, I may get there because, again, I feel very, very strongly that I've been fully out there for about 20 months. I am still transitioning.
Also,
I have some more surgery on the horizon, and I still, anyhow, the period of time making this full adjustment is not over. It's not gone.
And it's a long process, isn't it? Yeah.
It is a process. So I still think I'm on that journey through a transition.
Oh, I am totally. Yeah.
So one of the videos I called about myself, I called it Traveling Through Queer Space, which is an expression really about where you are if you're not entirely transitioned or you're not entirely clear about what you are. I don't really feel any doubt about who I am, but I do have a lot of adjusting. I am not there. I feel I've come a long way in those months, those 20 months, a long, long way, but I'm still not there. And I have to allow myself that time to adjust to living as Zoe and being Zoe, more importantly, being Zoe.
Yeah.
Having lived differently for many, many, many decades.
Yeah.
But I'm not there, and I'm not worried about not being there.
No.
I know that is just an essential part of this whole thing.
It's part of the journey, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's funny. I mean, I don't think about it like when when I first obviously started going out on jobs as Katie. I used to really think about it and how people. But now I just don't even think about it. This is me. This is just who I am, and I it's just. I think the more I've done it, just the more confident I've got, and I'm loving it, and I'm owning it now. It's.
I think I feel a lot of that. I do feel that.
Yeah, good.
I don't feel self-aware anymore. I mean, initially when I went out in the streets, I had the feeling the whole world would be looking at me.
Yeah.
Willing to take offence at almost anything. But now, no. And again, it comes back. I know that a lot of the young trans women will find it very difficult to look people in the eye. You see a lot of them. They've got maybe, say, mental health problems. They're looking to the ground and they're not talking about themselves. And I went to a group locally and I met quite a few, and there wasn't really much conversation going on at all.
No.
And no disclosure, no self-disclosure, even in what should have been an extraordinarily safe environment.
I think
being mature and having acquired the confidence that goes with having had fairly successful careers is an enormous advantage.
And I think that's something that we can both give back, because I'm glad you brought that, because I used to really envy, and I still do in a way, some of the young ones when you sort of see, that when they're transitioning early and because obviously the effects of the hormones, like if you're assigned as male at birth, the effect of testosterone, it's got less chance to do all that damage if you transition earlier and start on HRT earlier. And yeah, and I used to really envy them, because when you see them when they transition younger, they look stunning.
Yeah.
You just
You
wouldn't know at all. Absolutely amazing. Whereas obviously we've had a lot longer for the testosterone to do its damage. Yeah, and so I used to really envy them. But then it was pointed out to me, well, actually, yes, there's that side of it, but then with our side, for me, I've had 50 years of life, beating the hell out of me, and you've had even longer, and so with that, you build up a certain amount of resilience, and I think that's something that life experience has allowed us to cope with the transition much better than the younger ones, and that's why I think the younger ones often do end up with mental issues. So I think if we can give back a bit and help the younger ones to come through it just with our positivity, then I think that's a really good thing to do.
I recently watched Elton John's film, the Rocket Man.
Oh yeah.
I always was a great Elton John fan, I have to admit, particularly of his early work. And to me, almost an anthem is that song, "I'm Still Standing."
Yeah.
I love that song, and I know in the film they made it look like it was when he finally went into recovery from his alcoholism and drug addiction and so on. Yeah. And it wasn't he actually had that hit well before then. But even so, it has a great feeling for me. I'm still standing. I can survive. I can survive a divorce. I can survive coming through this with my second wife. And the fact she's divorced, we stayed together, which is an unusual situation, I think it's fair to say.
I'm so pleased for you. That's brilliant.
And, I'm still here. And then knowing that you can survive is a great thing when you take on the next challenge.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And for any older transitioners, who may be watching this, what advice would you give them?
Well, in a way, I think we've touched upon it in our conversation, and that is, the rest of the world doesn't really care.
No,
your children may. If you're married, your spouse will. But the rest of the world isn't looking at us. They will maybe see it as a 7-day wonder, but they're just not anywhere near as interested in other people, in this case yourself, as you imagine they are. We're all afraid of what other people think. Yeah. And it's very easy as social animals for us to wildly exaggerate the significance of what other people think, because most people quickly are then thinking, as we all do, about themselves, about their career, about their children, about their financial situation. Yeah. They're not thinking about so-and-so who's come out. Isn't that strange? They may say it, but that's it. And that's all it is, and it's gone within days or weeks at most.
Absolutely.
So that side of the fear is in your own head, not other people's heads.
Completely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for taking part in Cool People, Zoe. I really appreciate it. It's been a great talk, and I'm so glad we've finally been able to catch up with each other. It's taken far too long, hasn't it?
Well, thank you. I'm honoured to have been asked.
Well, no, you are one very cool person, so you had to be on the list. Definitely. And thank you very much for watching this edition of Cool People, and please catch up with the next one. And if you want to check out any of the stuff that I do, please have a look at my website, which is cooltobetrans.co.uk, and hope to see you on the next episode of Cool People.